She stood up for a stranger no one noticed, but when he walked into her office as her new boss, everything she thought she knew about him changed. It was a quiet afternoon, the city hum muffled beneath a soft drizzle that left the streets gleaming with reflections of fading sunlight. She was on her way to an appointment, her heels clicking softly against the wet pavement, her coat pulled tightly around her slender frame to fend off the chill. The familiar rhythm of her steps felt comforting, grounding her amid the usual whirlwind of work and expectations. But then, something, or someone, caught her attention. A man sat hunched by the corner, wrapped in layers too thin to keep the cold at bay. His clothes were worn and stained, a patchwork of hardship stitched into the fabric, and his eyes, despite their weariness, flickered with a quiet dignity. He was speaking softly to himself when a harsh voice cut through the air. A passerby, impatient and scornful, was demanding he move along, dismissing him like an inconvenient shadow. Without thinking, she stepped closer, the rustle of her coat breaking the tension. Her voice, calm but firm, rose gently against the harshness. "Please, leave him be. There's no need for unkindness." The world seemed to narrow to that moment, the way her hand brushed lightly against the man's arm, warm despite the chill, a silent reassurance that she was there, an ally in an indifferent world. She felt the roughness of his skin beneath her fingertips, the pulse of life steady but fragile. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, and she saw a flicker of surprise, gratitude, a fragile bridge between two strangers. Around them, the city moved on, indifferent, but she lingered for a moment longer, watching as the man straightened slightly, a small, grateful smile tugging at the corners of his lips. The scent of rain mingled with the faint aroma of tobacco on his breath, grounding her in the reality of his world, so different from hers. She turned away, her steps slower now, the warmth of that brief touch lingering like an echo. Inside, she wrestled with a quiet unease. Compassion had stirred something inside her, a mix of hope and vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to feel. She thought about the man's eyes, the gentle strength beneath his worn exterior, and wondered about the life that had brought him there. The city's noise seemed softer now, the rain a gentle percussion on the pavement as she continued her walk, her mind replaying the moment. It was more than a random act of kindness, it was a reminder that beneath the surface, everyone carried a story, and sometimes, a simple act could mean everything. Little did she know, this brief encounter would unravel the carefully ordered chapters of her own life, bringing her face to face with unexpected truths, and a connection that neither time nor circumstance could easily explain. The next morning arrived with an uneasy stillness, the kind that clings to the air before everything changes. She slipped into her office building, the familiar click of the elevator and the soft murmur of colleagues already at their desks creating a predictable rhythm she usually welcomed. But today felt different, charged, almost electric. The news had spread quietly but swiftly, the company had a new CEO. She wasn't sure what to expect, rumors floated between admiration and skepticism, but none prepared her for the man who stepped into the room moments later. He entered with an understated confidence, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. His tailored blazer fit perfectly, the deep navy fabric catching the morning light, contrasting sharply with the threadbare jacket she had seen only hours before. Yet, beneath the sharp lines of his suit, there was something familiar, something that stirred a quiet recognition in her chest. Their eyes met across the room, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. His gaze was steady and unguarded, the same quiet dignity she had glimpsed before now wrapped in a new layer of poise. The faint scent of expensive cologne mingled with an earthy undertone, a subtle reminder of a life lived in two worlds. As he approached her desk, the room seemed to hush around them. When he extended his hand in greeting, the warmth of his touch was surprisingly grounding, lingering just long enough to make her pulse quicken. There was no arrogance in his manner, no need to assert power, only a quiet strength that invited trust. "Good morning," he said, voice calm and steady, with a hint of something softer beneath the formality. She found herself struggling to find the words, caught between disbelief and curiosity. The man she had defended just hours ago was now the one holding the reins of a company she had devoted years to. The lines between past and present blurred in her mind, but she forced a composed smile. "Welcome," she replied, her voice steady though her heart raced beneath it. Throughout the morning, their interactions were brief but charged, a glance exchanged over morning reports, a subtle nod in meetings, moments where words weren't necessary but meaning hung heavily in the air. She noticed the way he listened intently, the slight crease in his brow when considering a problem, the way his eyes softened just a fraction when they met hers. Yet, beneath the surface, questions simmered. Who was he really? How had fate twisted their lives so suddenly and irreversibly? She felt a strange mixture of admiration and caution, a delicate tension that settled in her chest like the first chill of autumn. Outside the glass walls of the office, the city buzzed with its usual frenetic energy, but inside, time seemed to slow, each heartbeat amplified in the quiet space between them. As the day wore on, she found herself drawn inexplicably toward him, curiosity blooming into something more complex, a tentative thread of connection stretching taut between two unlikely souls. The boundaries of their worlds, once so distinct, began to blur, setting the stage for a journey neither could yet fully understand. Days passed, each filled with the familiar cadence of work, yet beneath the surface, an undercurrent of tension threaded through their encounters. He moved through the office with quiet assurance, commanding respect without overt displays of power. She noticed the subtle way he navigated conversations, always listening first, measuring his words with care, a stark contrast to the harsh world she had imagined when she saw him on the street. Their exchanges were brief and polite, but charged with an unspoken awareness. In the crowded conference rooms and hushed corridors, their eyes often met, holding flickers of recognition and questions neither dared voice aloud. Each glance was a silent conversation, a gentle probing beneath the surface, like two dancers testing the rhythm before stepping fully into the dance. She wrestled with a swirl of emotions, admiration for his resilience, curiosity about the man behind the title, and a hesitant apprehension about what this connection might mean. His presence unsettled the order she had carefully built, stirring feelings she hadn't expected to confront at this stage in her life. The age difference, the vast gulf between their worlds, all whispered cautions she struggled to ignore. In one meeting, as she handed him a folder thick with reports, their fingers brushed, a fleeting touch, so light it might have been imagined. Yet, it left a warmth that lingered, a subtle electric pulse that made her heart beat unevenly. She caught herself stealing a glance at him, noticing the slight furrow in his brow as he studied the documents, the way his jaw tightened just enough to reveal concentration. Afterward, she found herself replaying that moment in her mind, the sensation of his touch etched like a secret promise. It was an intimacy born not from words, but from the closeness that grew between them, quietly but insistently. Their conversations began to stretch beyond the professional. During breaks, she found him in the lounge, quietly sipping coffee, and their small talk deepened into sharing stories, carefully, cautiously. He spoke of his past in fragments, the hardships that had once pushed him to the streets, the struggles he had fought in silence. She listened, the steady calm of his voice drawing her in, painting pictures of pain and hope interwoven. In turn, she shared glimpses of her own life, the loneliness that sometimes wrapped around her despite a successful career, the fears she rarely admitted aloud. With each revelation, the walls between them softened, revealing two souls craving understanding and connection. Yet, despite this growing closeness, hesitation held them apart. He bore the weight of his new role, mindful of boundaries, she guarded her heart, wary of the judgments that whispered behind closed doors. The unspoken barriers, age, status, and past wounds, created a delicate dance of approach and retreat, longing and restraint. Through it all, their eyes continued to meet across the office, silent acknowledgments of a bond forming, fragile but undeniable. Each shared smile, each careful touch of the hand, built a bridge between their worlds, one tentative step at a time. The office was quiet that evening, bathed in the soft glow of desk lamps and the fading light slipping through tall windows. The usual buzz of activity had given way to a serene stillness, making the space feel almost intimate, a private world away from the relentless demands of daylight hours. She lingered at her desk, her fingers tracing the rim of a warm mug filled with coffee, the bitter aroma mingling with the faint scent of rain that had begun again outside. Her thoughts swirled with the day's events, but her mind kept drifting back to him, the man who had once been a stranger on the street, now seated just a few feet away, his sharp suit replaced by a loosened collar and a quiet vulnerability that was almost tangible. Their earlier meeting had stretched longer than usual, a chance encounter in the dimming light where the formal masks slipped away. He had shared pieces of his story, not with the polished ease of a corporate leader, but with raw honesty that unsettled her in the most unexpected way. "I wasn't always here," he had said softly, voice low and steady. "There was a time when the world felt too heavy to carry. When I was just surviving." She listened, the room narrowing until it felt like they were the only two people left. His words painted vivid images: cold nights spent on unforgiving sidewalks, the sting of rejection, the quiet fight to reclaim dignity. There was no self-pity in his tone, only a quiet strength born from hardship. In response, she found herself opening up, a vulnerable admission slipping from her lips. "Sometimes, I wonder if I'm just playing a part," she confessed. "Keeping up appearances, hiding what I'm really afraid of." Her voice trembled slightly, and she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the soft movement betraying her nerves. He watched her, eyes warm and understanding, and without a word, reached across the table. His hand found hers, gentle, steady, reassuring. The contact was electric in its simplicity. She felt the steady beat of his pulse beneath her palm, the faint roughness of his skin, and the quiet steadiness of his presence. It was an unspoken promise, a silent declaration that in this moment, they were equals, two souls laid bare without pretense. For a while, they sat like that, the silence filled with unspoken words and shared understanding. Outside, the rain tapped softly against the glass, a soothing rhythm that mirrored the slow thawing of walls built long ago. In that fragile space, something shifted, the beginning of trust, the spark of something deeper. Neither hurried to fill the silence, allowing the weight of the moment to settle and grow. When she finally pulled her hand away, the room felt warmer, more alive. There was a softness in his gaze she hadn't seen before, and a quiet hope that something uncharted awaited them both. As she gathered her things to leave, the lingering touch of his hand on hers stayed with her, a reminder that beneath the facades of power and status, there was a shared humanity yearning to be seen and understood. Days blended seamlessly into one another, but between the rhythms of office life, an invisible thread wove their souls closer, delicate, fragile, yet undeniable. The world around them buzzed with activity, yet whenever their eyes met, the noise dimmed into a quiet hum, as if time itself bent to the weight of what remained unsaid. Their encounters became small moments of stolen intimacy. A chance meeting by the coffee machine where their hands brushed as she reached for the same cup. The soft warmth of his fingers grazing hers sent a shiver through her, leaving her breath caught somewhere between surprise and longing. Neither spoke of it, but the silence hung thick with meaning. In meetings, they shared subtle glances across the table, brief, charged, the slightest widening of his eyes catching her off guard, or the almost imperceptible tilt of her head that held a secret smile. The distance between them was measured not just in inches but in what they dared to reveal and what they chose to hide. She found herself noticing the small things about him, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her directly, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, and the quiet strength in the way he carried himself. He, in turn, caught the way her fingers nervously twisted the silver ring on her hand, or how her eyes sparkled faintly in the afternoon light filtering through the windows. Even their silences became a language, a shared conversation of longing and restraint. At times, their proximity left her breathless, standing near him as they reviewed reports, the warmth radiating from his body a stark contrast to the cool air-conditioned room. She could feel the subtle rise and fall of his chest, the faint pulse at his wrist when their fingers accidentally brushed while exchanging documents. Each day, the magnetic pull between them grew heavier, yet neither dared to cross the invisible boundary that separated professional respect from personal desire. Fear and caution tangled with yearning, the weight of social expectations, the power imbalance, the quiet judgment that lurked behind office doors. But in quieter moments, when the office emptied and the hum of the city outside softened, their shared glances stretched longer. Sometimes, she caught him watching her from across the room, his eyes reflecting a depth of feeling he could not yet voice. Other times, she found herself lingering a little longer in his presence, drawn by the unspoken promise in his steady gaze. One evening, as they passed each other in the hallway, their hands brushed once more, this time deliberately, yet neither spoke. The subtle warmth that radiated between their skin was both comforting and electric, igniting a silent conversation of what could be. The tension was palpable, a slow-burning ember beneath the surface of their carefully guarded facades. It wasn't a passion shouted aloud but a quiet yearning, a mutual understanding of something precious growing in the space between them. Though words remained unspoken, the language of touches and glances spoke volumes. In every fleeting moment, every accidental brush, they built a connection that neither time nor circumstance could easily undo. And as the days passed, they both knew that this silent pull was no accident, it was the beginning of something neither was yet ready to name, but both felt deeply in the core of their being. The gentle rhythm of their growing connection was suddenly interrupted by the harsh realities lurking just beyond the office walls. Rumors began to ripple through the corridors like a cold wind, whispers that curled around her like icy fingers, chilling her carefully guarded heart. Colleagues exchanged sidelong glances, and hushed conversations ceased when she entered the room. The subtle judgment was unmistakable, and it unsettled her more deeply than she expected. She felt the weight of every gaze, each unspoken accusation pressing against her like an invisible barrier. The age gap between them, once a quiet detail in the background, now seemed like a glaring spotlight. The stark difference in their positions, him as the powerful CEO, and her as an employee, added another layer of complexity, stirring doubts that gnawed at her confidence. Inside, a storm of emotions churned. She wrestled with fear of being misunderstood, of becoming the subject of gossip, of the delicate balance between professional respect and personal vulnerability tipping irrevocably. Her hands trembled sometimes as she tried to steady herself, a fleeting brush of nervousness that no one else saw. Meanwhile, he bore his own burdens with quiet resilience. His pride warred with the reality of their situation, the power he held, the past he carried, and the potential fallout of their growing closeness. Late at night, he would stare out over the city skyline, the lights twinkling like distant stars, and wonder if his life could withstand the turbulence that love might bring. One evening, unable to bear the silence any longer, they met outside the office building under a sky streaked with the fading hues of dusk. The chill in the air mirrored the tension between them, but neither wanted to retreat. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly, her voice barely above the whisper of the wind. "Not just of what others might say, but of what this means for me, for us." He reached out, his hand warm and steady as it gently took hers, grounding her in the moment. "I'm scared too," he confessed, his voice low and raw with honesty. "Of losing what I've fought so hard to build. But more than that. I'm scared of losing you." The vulnerability in his words broke through the walls she had built, and for a moment, the world around them faded away. The cool night air seemed warmer as they stood close, the faint rustle of leaves whispering secrets only they could hear. Her fingers twined with his, the roughness of his skin a comforting contrast to her softness. The connection between them was a fragile thread, stretched taut by fear but unbroken. "We don't know what the future holds," she said, her voice steadying. "But I do know one thing, I want to face it with you." He nodded, a slow smile tugging at his lips, the tension easing from his shoulders. "Together," he agreed. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the hum of the city and the fading light, they chose honesty over fear, connection over doubt. They embraced the messy, complicated reality of their feelings, knowing the path ahead would be difficult but worth every step. And as they stood hand in hand beneath the darkening sky, the invisible barriers between them began to crumble, not erased, but softened by trust, respect, and a shared courage to face whatever came next. The city lights twinkled softly in the early evening, casting a gentle glow that mingled with the fading warmth of the day. They stood together on a small balcony just off her office, a quiet refuge overlooking the restless pulse of the streets below. The air was crisp but carried the faint scent of blooming jasmine from a nearby garden, wrapping around them like a delicate embrace. She reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing against his palm. The simple touch felt like a bridge, connecting two worlds that had once seemed impossibly distant. His hand closed over hers with a quiet certainty, warm and reassuring, grounding her in the present moment. The tension that had shadowed their days seemed to dissolve into the night air. Here, away from prying eyes and whispered judgments, there was only the soft rhythm of their breathing and the gentle beat of their hearts aligning in steady harmony. He looked at her with a tenderness that made her chest swell, a look that spoke of respect, gratitude, and something deeper, something brave. She saw not just the man who had risen from hardship, but the soul who had quietly stood beside her, steady and unwavering. "I never imagined this," she murmured, voice soft but filled with honesty. "That someone so different from me, would see me. Really see me." He smiled, a slow, genuine curve that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Neither did I. But sometimes life surprises us in the most unexpected ways." Their conversation drifted gently between them, words flowing easily now, stories of past regrets, hopes for the future, and the quiet joy of shared understanding. They spoke without hurry, savoring the rare intimacy that comes not from grand gestures but from small moments, a lingering glance, a gentle squeeze of the hand, the warmth of a shared smile. She leaned slightly against him, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest beneath her cheek. The soft fabric of his jacket was a comforting weight against her skin, and the faint scent of his cologne mingled with the night air, earthy and familiar. "It won't be easy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't want to hide what we have. I want to face whatever comes, together." He nodded, his gaze steady and filled with promise. "We'll take it one day at a time. No rush. Just us." As they stood there, wrapped in the quiet warmth of their connection, the city's distant sounds faded into a gentle backdrop. There was no need for grand declarations or dramatic finales, only the honest acceptance of an unlikely love that had taken root, strong and resilient. In that moment, age and circumstance melted away, leaving just two people who had chosen to embrace vulnerability and hope. Their hands remained entwined, a silent vow of companionship, respect, and the courage to step forward, hand in hand. And as the night deepened around them, they knew this was only the beginning, a slow-burning journey marked by trust, quiet passion, and the profound comfort of being truly seen.